Hello, I'm Simon Owens. For those who aren't familiar with my work, I run a podcast and a newsletter that is focused on the media industry. And a few weeks ago, I put a call out to my social media subscribers to, ask me any questions that they had, and I told them I would try to answer them to the best of my abilities in a video like the one you're watching now. Unfortunately, I got bogged down with a bunch of work over a period of weeks, and I'm just now getting to it. But I did want to make it a priority to answer your questions. So I'm going to try my best to do it here. This is one of the first vlogs that I've ever shot, so bear with me a little bit. My hope is to be able to do these more regularly. We'll see how I can fit it into my workflow. I guess the best way to ensure that that happens is to basically become a paid subscriber to my Substack. The more people who subscribe to my Substack, the more time I can devote to comments and asking questions and other kinds of content. I'm going to put a link in the comments section of this video where you can get a 20% discount for the first year to my Substack newsletter. There's lots of great stuff that you can get if you become a paying subscriber. Not only do you continue to get the great newsletters and podcasts that I'm already putting out, but you also get these exclusive premium case studies that I create where I interview some of the top practitioners in media about how they build their businesses, really kind of break it down for you. I think these things deliver a ton of value. And when you subscribe, not only do you get any new case studies that come out, but now I have dozens of them in my archives that you can really easily go through and read through. So there's a lot of value there. So click on the link in the comments section and become a subscriber, and I'd be really thankful for that. And then also, if you do have any other further questions for me to answer, just leave them in the comments section, and then the next time that I shoot one of these videos, I will answer them. Okay, with all that said, let's jump into the questions that you asked me. So, Kin Kupchik, I guess I should have looked up how to pronounce these names beforehand, asks, do you think it's possible to build a media brand from one weekly newsletter with an accompanying blog, or are frequent touch points extremely important, a la Morning Brew, The Hustle? So Morning Brew, The Hustle, for those who don't know, it's like a morning newsletter. It comes 6 or 7 days a week, so there's very high frequency. I do think frequency is important, because if you become too infrequent, then you're not basically reinforcing your brand over and over again, and it's hard for users to build you into their reading habits and also recognize you are who you are, in the sense of, if I land on an article and just read one article from a person, I might not even notice who wrote it. It's not until I'm constantly landing on that person's content that I begin to kind of conceptualize and understand that there's a person there. So in order to build your brand, you have to be able to hit people with enough frequency for that recognition to kick in. I think weekly is about as infrequent as you can go. I think a weekly cadence is actually pretty good, especially if you're doing this as kind of like a side gig with having your full-time job. Anything slower than that, I just don't think you're landing in people's inboxes with enough frequency. You're going to get a lot of unsubscribes because people will subscribe, and then there will be several weeks that go by, and then by the time you email them again, they forget that they subscribed to you, so they don't even know to open it. So yeah, you just want to be able to build a habit, and I think a weekly newsletter, especially if it's coming in at the same time every week, is probably a good cadence for you. Jaron Vincent asks, I've noticed a lot of turnover at the Information lately. Do you know anything about what's going on there? So the Information's a great company. I've been following it closely. I actually just had Jessica Lesson, the founder of the Information, on my podcast, The Business of Content. You should definitely check that interview out. I don't get any sense that they're hurting or they're laying people off or anything like that. Yeah, sure, some people have been coming and going, but they've actually made a bunch of new hires and a bunch of announcements for new hires just within the last few weeks. So it seems like it's staying steady. staying steady or even growing. So it's still a robust business as far as I can tell. It's a great business. Partly it just has a great brand. It's really well known within the tech industry. It's really well respected. Its journalism is regularly cited, within on big accounts on Twitter and emailed back and forth by major tech executives and stuff. Just because the information is so laser focused on creating high impact journalism. Part of that is because they don't rely on any kind of advertising. They don't have any clickbait. It's all about getting people to subscribe for $400 a year, which is a hefty sum. And in order to be able to ask for that amount, you have to ensure every day that you are delivering an incredibly high quality product. I think also another benefit to the information or asset in there for them is that they did not take on massive VC investment, so they're scaling responsibly. So this is why they're not pivoting to video or hiring hundreds of journalists that they can't support. They're staying very lean. They're growing, but they're growing responsibly. So I think that is a great business and is still doing well. Becky Palak asks, what's the latest with Timeout? I thought that their Timeout market concept was so smart and innovative, but that was before the pandemic. What are they doing next? I have to confess, Becky, I haven't really been following what Timeout has been doing. For those who don't know what Timeout is, it's like a series. It's a company with like hundreds of regional and city-based magazines, kind of like very kind of local alt-weekly type of coverage and stuff like that. But I haven't been really following what they've been doing lately. Timeout Market, which you're referring to, I did a little Googling. It seems to be some kind of physical space that sells food and puts on events in all these cities, but I couldn't really find any reporting on how it's doing. My guess, it hasn't been doing great during the pandemic. I guess the question is, do they have enough capital to basically ride out the pandemic so they can come out on the other side unscathed? I don't know. It's a private company. Terrell Johnson asks, what's your take on the state of independent podcasting right now? If you were starting one from scratch, what would you do to help it find an audience, and what would you focus on? So I think we're heading toward an explosion in indie podcasting, similar to what we saw with indie YouTubers back in like 2012, 2013. Back then, YouTube was still kind of introducing advertising, its advertising platform, and making it available to anyone with over 1,000 subscribers. And it didn't have a huge market at first because advertisers and brands weren't used to the YouTube ecosystem yet, but it's been slowly building up its power and its might, and now YouTube is generating $20 billion a year in advertising, and the vast majority of that is going to actual creators, in a lot of cases indie creators. And so far with podcasting, we just haven't had the same kind of infrastructure available to them. Most of the major podcast apps weren't doing anything to help them make money in the same way that YouTube was helping them make money. But Apple and Spotify, they're just now launching in-app subscriptions capabilities, so people can easily subscribe to paid content within the apps themselves. Spotify is building like a real ad tech network that's similar to YouTube's that indie podcasters are going to be able to opt into. So I think there's just going to be a real explosion in the indie podcast scene. In a few years, it's going to be much easier to make a living as an indie podcaster. Now, most of the podcasters who are making good money are part of much larger networks like Gimlet or Wondery or Spotify or whatever. But I think the table's gonna shift, and there's gonna be a lot more power given to the indie podcasters and their ability to have real influence and make real money. Rick Harp asks, still hoping you can tell me what tools you use to create ebooks. I'm sorry, Rick, if maybe you asked this question before and maybe I missed it. So sorry about that. I wasn't intentionally ignoring you. So my ebooks are pretty low tech. I don't do them in like the Amazon ecosystem. I tried that years ago. It's kind of a pain in the ass. I basically put all the chapters into a Google Doc, and then I create a PDF document out of that Google Doc, and then I just upload the PDF to Gumroad, which is kind of like a creator focused platform for selling digital information goods. And I experimented with my first ebooks just a few months ago. I sold them for $15 a pop. It generated a few $100s for me. So it's not like I'm not going to be able to quit my job based on it, but it gave me some more incremental revenue to add to my subscriptions. And I'm hoping to grow that as a revenue line in the next year. William Foreman asks briefly, what are the top 5 trends in the media industry? So I kind of jotted down a few notes on what I think they are. So let's go through them. First one is e-commerce. Like, publishers are getting a lot better at leveraging their reach to push actual sales with native content. And this is kind of good for them because for the last 20 years, they've been unfairly judged by how many clicks they get in display ads, which was a ridiculous way to judge them at all. But like it or not, that's how they were judged. So finally, but display ads have such terrible click-through rates. There's such terrible ad blindness. They're just not effective for driving clicks. So finally, publishers have wisened up to this, and so they're structuring, their affiliate programs, also creating native advertising deals where they're creating native content that resembles their regular editorial content, which is much better at getting people to click on it, much better at driving sales. So you're seeing increasingly sophisticated e-commerce operations from places like the New York Times, which has Wirecutter, which they put so much love and care into every single article in terms of testing out different products. And then on the other end of the spectrum, you have things like BuzzFeed, where they're actually collaborating with retailers and product lines to basically design their own products and sell them, which is really smart. But it's hard to do, but they're probably scaling that more effectively. So that's the first trend. The next trend is the unbundling and the rebundling of media. So you have this kind of Substack era, the Substack revolution, where lots of writers are quitting their mainstream media jobs and going off their own and basically generating a lot more income and reach on their own newsletters than they did via their mainstream media companies. But you're seeing some of them that are so successful that they're basically rebundling. They're creating these writer cooperatives where they have, a flotilla of 5 or 6 or more writers writing for the same outlet and kind of pulling their resources and reach to generate more revenue. So you're seeing kind of basically these small, very agile media companies that are popping up as a result of the unbundling of media. So it's unbundling and then rebundling. The next trend is better relationships with platforms. So the era of 2012 to 2016 or so was that era when Facebook was sending a ton of traffic to media companies, to their websites and stuff like that. But these platforms weren't doing much to actually help them monetize. And then what happened is basically every time they would switch their algorithms or rein something in, it would hurt these media companies that were trying to build businesses off the platforms. So then media companies started becoming a lot more skeptical about how they approach these relationships, negotiating better deals in terms of any resources they put towards it. And then also the platforms themselves are now being incentivized to work in ways that help both them and the media companies because they're both generating revenue. So you're seeing Facebook instant articles where publishers can put their native content on Facebook's platform. It's getting much better at selling ads and monetizing those articles, but then also launching things like subscriptions, video subscriptions. And also they're launching a newsletter product where people can subscribe. And in that case, there will be more synergy between the two, both the publisher and the platform, because both are incentivized to make money, and both benefit more directly when content does really well. The next trend I would say is the explosion of the creator economy. This is somewhat tied into the unbundling, but a little bit wider across all platforms and mediums. It's just going to be so freaking huge. You think about, YouTube alone generating billions of dollars for individual creators, Instagram through sponsorship deals, billions of dollars. Now you got Spotify and Apple moving into the mix to finally monetize the podcast industry. And then we're really only at the beginning of the Substack revolution. I know I'm using the word Substack when I really mean all kinds of newsletter companies, so I'm sure that'll annoy people, but Substack is kind of standing in for monetized newsletters. I think that market's going to be many times larger larger than it is today. And then maybe the fifth one is the return to better advertising. And this kind of ties a little bit more into the e-commerce thing as well, is I'm seeing a lot, especially with people I'm interviewing for my podcast and newsletter, I'm seeing lots of especially local publishers just get really better at like self-service ads, native ads, just really kind of being able to outcompete Google and Facebook by creating a better advertising experience and having a much tighter relationship with their readers. So I think there's some exciting things still happening in the advertising space, even though it seems like every single publisher is pivoting to subscriptions. Lee Kuhn, again, this is something where I probably should have actually looked up the pronunciations, but she asks, I'm curious to learn more about crowdfunding in media, when it helped create sustainable outlets versus when it was just a flash in the pan. So with crowdfunding, like obviously like PBS and public radio have been running very successful crowdfunding campaigns for decades. And it's just such a great model where rather than asking for donations year round, they have these pledge drives where they just hammer home and just create so much messaging and kind of almost annoy their audiences to the point of actually donating and becoming members and stuff like that. And that's been pretty effective. More recently, The Guardian has seen success in terms of collecting donations without paywalling the content. And part of that is because they're not really like a traditional for-profit company. It's a foundation, so they operate somewhat in a similar manner to NPR and PBS. But I think there's like kind of a limit to how much people are willing to give out of the goodness of their hearts. Like, you know, this whole like donate us to support our journalism, that works to a certain extent with some of your most hardcore fans, but I don't think by itself most media companies are going to be able to succeed with that model. I think that some news outlets can use it to diversify their revenue and basically generate money through like their most constant readers or listeners or watchers. And it's a good way to, you know, add into the revenue pie and also shore up any lost revenue when there's a sudden drop in advertising revenue. Like lots of local publishers have basically been doing crowdfunding drives during the pandemic about how, you know, they're in danger of going under and they need their support. So I think that's been effective. But overall, I think there's going to be very few media companies that can subsist on like crowdfunding alone. You need to either monetize with something through like advertising or events or something like that, or you need to offer something in exchange for people paying. So like, you know, the most obvious candidate is actual content, placing it behind a paywall and basically telling your readership that they have to pay up to access that content. Okay, well, those were all the questions I had. I'm still getting used to this Q&A format. I'm not super great at speaking extemporaneously. I'll try to edit out all the awkward pauses and stuff like that. But I'll try to get better at this. I'd love to do more of these. Again, there's a 20% off link in the comments section for my Substack. Please become a paid subscriber if you want to support the journalism that I am working really hard to churn out each week. Thanks a lot, and I look forward to doing this again.